Hello everyone. Welcome to Realist Quill. Like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? I've been backpacking across Europe for almost 3 years now, staying in hostels to save money and meet other travelers. Most of my experiences have been great. You know, the typical stories of late-night conversations with strangers who become friends, sharing beers on rooftops, and exchanging travel tips. But what happened to me in Prague? That's something I've tried to forget. I was staying at this place called the Blue Door Hostel in the Old Town district. It had good reviews online. Clean, affordable, decent location. Nothing fancy, but exactly what I needed. When I checked in, this older woman at the front desk seemed not unfriendly exactly. But there was something about her smile that didn't reach her eyes. She kept staring at me while handing over my key card, almost like she was sizing me up. "Room 307, she said. "Third floor. The elevator is not working today. Take the stairs." The building was this renovated old apartment complex, probably from the Soviet era, with high ceilings and these long, dimly lit hallways. My room was at the very end of one of these hallways, past at least 15 other doors. The farther I walked, the quieter it got, until all I could hear were my own footsteps on the creaky wooden floors. I'll admit I was already feeling a bit uneasy by the time I reached my room. The door to 307 looked exactly like all the others. Standard, painted white, with a small brass number plate. But something caught my eye. There was a second lock on this door, an old-fashioned keyhole beneath the card reader. Strange, but I figured maybe it was just an older security feature they hadn't removed during renovations. The room itself was basic. 6 bunk beds arranged against the walls, a small window overlooking an alleyway, and a bathroom with a shower stall. Nothing out of the ordinary. But the weird thing was, even though the hostel seemed pretty full downstairs, this room was completely empty. All 12 beds were neatly made, without any sign of other guests. I chose a bottom bunk near the window, figuring I'd at least have some control over my environment if I could see outside. I unpacked a few essentials, locked my valuables in the small locker provided, and headed out to explore the city. Prague in October is beautiful. All golden leaves and Gothic architecture under moody gray skies. I spent the day wandering around, taking photos, eating street food, doing the usual tourist things. By the time I got back to the hostel around 10 p.m., I was exhausted. The common room downstairs was packed with travelers drinking cheap beer and playing cards. I chatted with a few people, but honestly I was beat and just wanted to crash. Around midnight, I headed back up to my room. The hallway seemed even darker and longer than I remember. As I approached room 307, I noticed something strange. There was light coming from under the door. Someone else had checked in while I was out. I swiped my key card, pushed open the door, and froze. The room was exactly as I'd left it. Empty. No other travelers. No luggage. Nothing. But every single light was on. The overhead lights. The reading lamps attached to each bunk. Even the bathroom light. I distinctly remembered turning everything off before leaving. I checked all the beds, looked in the bathroom, even checked under the bunks, thinking maybe someone was playing a prank. Nothing. Figuring it must have been the cleaning staff. I got ready for bed, turned everything off again, and crawled into my bunk. I must have fallen asleep pretty quickly, because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by the sound of the door opening. The room was pitch black, but I could hear someone entering, their footsteps light on the floor. Then, another person. Then, I lay perfectly still, my heart pounding, as I heard what sounded like at least 5 or 6 people moving around the room in the darkness. I heard whispers, not in English, not in Czech, but something else I couldn't identify. Then the sounds of people climbing into the bunks around me, the creaking of mattresses, the rustling of sheets. I wanted to reach for my phone to use the flashlight, but I was paralyzed with fear. Eventually the noises stopped, and the room fell silent, except for what sounded like the steady breathing of sleeping people. I lay there for what felt like hours, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly. Finally, exhaustion took over, and I must have fallen back asleep. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the window. I sat up quickly and looked around the room. Empty. All the beds were made, pristine, with no sign that anyone had slept in them. I checked my phone. 8:17 a.m. I got dressed quickly, packed up my stuff, and practically ran down to the front desk. A different person was working now, a younger guy with a friendly smile. "Checking out already?" he asked. "You booked for 3 nights?" "Yeah, change of plans," I muttered. "Hey, quick question. Was anyone else assigned to room 307 last night?" He tapped at his computer. "Room 307. No. You were the only guest in that room." "Are you sure? I thought I heard people come in last night." He looked confused. "That's not possible. That room has been under renovation for water damage. You were in No. My key says 307. I insisted, showing him the key card envelope. He took it from me, looking increasingly confused. "This says 307. Sure enough, the envelope clearly said 3. I felt a chill run down my spine. "What's in room 307? I asked. His expression changed, just for a moment. Something dark passed behind his eyes before he forced a smile. "Storage. That room has been storage for years. The lock is different. You wouldn't have been able to access it with your key card." I paid my bill and got out of there as fast as I could. Later that day, as I was checking into a different hostel across town, curiosity got the better of me. I looked up the Blue Door Hostel online, scrolling through reviews until I found what I was looking for. A review from about 6 months earlier. "Weird experience. Was assigned to room 306, but kept hearing noises from room 307 next door every night. When I asked staff about it, they got super defensive and said that room has been closed for years after multiple guests complained about night terrors while staying there. Would not recommend." I kept scrolling and found another one, from nearly a year before. "Do not stay here. Was put in room 306 and heard people in the room next door. 307. All night whispering in some strange language. When I looked through the keyhole, I saw nothing. Room was empty but sounds continued all night. Asked to change rooms and staff acted like I was crazy. I never went back to the Blue Door Hostel. But sometimes, especially when I'm staying in a new place, I still wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I hear those same whispers, those same light footsteps, and I wonder what really was in room 307, and why. For one night, they wanted me to be there with them." You know those super cheap hostels you find listed at the very bottom of Hostel World, the ones with like 2-star ratings that cost €5 a night? Well, I'm gonna tell you why you should never ever book one of those places, no matter how tight your budget is. This happened about 2 years ago when I was backpacking through Eastern Europe. I'd been on the road for about 4 months by then, and my funds were getting seriously low. I was in Budapest, and I needed to stretch my money another 2 weeks until my flight home from Warsaw. So I booked the absolute cheapest place I could find, this hostel called Budget Beds Budapest, for like €4 a night. The reviews were sparse and mixed. Some people complained about cleanliness, others about the location, but nothing that seemed like a deal breaker for someone as broke as I was. The address took me to this old apartment building in a part of the city that was definitely not on any tourist map. The building itself looked like it hadn't been renovated since communist times. Crumbling concrete, graffiti-covered walls, and this heavy metal door with an intercom system that looked like it was installed in the... I pressed the button for budget beds, and after a long wait, a scratchy voice answered and buzzed me in without even asking who I was. The lobby was dimly lit with flickering fluorescent lights, and the elevator had an out-of-order sign. So I had to carry my backpack up 5 flights of stairs. When I finally found the door with a small handwritten budget bed sign, I was already regretting my decision to save those few extra euros. A guy who looked like he'd just woken up answered the door. He was maybe in his 40s, unshaven with this permanent squint. He didn't say anything, just held out his hand for payment. After I paid him in cash, no receipt, of course, he led me through what was essentially a converted apartment. The common area was just a kitchen with a small TV and some mismatched furniture. There were 2 other travelers sitting there looking as uncomfortable as I felt. The guy pointed to a door at the end of a narrow hallway and handed me a key. "Breakfast is bread, 7 to 9, he said in broken English. And that was the extent of my check-in experience. I made my way to the room, which turned out to be an 8-bed dorm that clearly used to be someone's bedroom. The ceiling was low. There was only one tiny window that looked out into an air shaft, and the bunk beds were so close together you could probably reach out and hold hands with the person in the next bed. There were 2 other people already in the room, a guy reading a book on a top bunk, and a girl sorting through her backpack. They both gave me that traveler's nod. The universal "hey, I see you but I don't necessarily want to talk right now" greet. I claimed an empty bottom bunk, secured my valuables in the small locker provided, which miraculously had a functioning lock, and decided to head out to explore the city rather than spend any more time in that depressing room than necessary. When I returned that evening, there were a few more people in the common area, including a group of guys drinking cheap vodka straight from the bottle. I exchanged some basic traveler small talk. Where are you from? Where have you been? Where are you going next? But there was a weird vibe. Nobody seemed particularly friendly or open, which is unusual in hostels, where people typically love sharing stories. Around midnight, I headed to bed. The dorm was now fully occupied, and I had to climb over someone's backpack to get to my bunk. As I was settling in, the guy in the bunk above me leaned down and whispered, "You're new, right?" I nodded. "Just so you know, don't go to the bathroom in the middle of the night." "Why not?" I asked. "Just don't," he said, before rolling over to face the wall. Great, super helpful and not at all creepy. Despite the uncomfortable bed and stuffy air, I eventually fell asleep. I woke up a few hours later needing to use the bathroom desperately. I remembered the weird warning but figured the guy was probably just trying to scare the noob. Besides, I really had to go. The hallway outside our room was completely dark. I used my phone's flashlight to navigate to the bathroom, which was at the opposite end of the hallway from our room. As I approached, I noticed that the bathroom door was slightly ajar, with a faint light coming from inside. I pushed the door open slowly. The bathroom was small and grimy, with a single shower stall, a toilet, and a sink with a cracked mirror above. The light was coming from a bare bulb hanging from the ceiling that flickered intermittently. As I was using the toilet, I heard a sound from the shower stall behind me. The shower curtain was drawn closed, which I hadn't noticed when I came in. The sound was something wet moving against the shower floor, a slow, deliberate, dragging noise. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking a bit. No response, but the dragging sound stopped. I quickly finished up, and as I was washing my hands, I glanced at the mirror. In the reflection, I could see the shower curtain move, just slightly, but enough that I knew it wasn't my imagination. I turned around slowly. The curtain was perfectly still now. Against my better judgment, I took a step toward the shower stall. My heart was pounding in my chest, As I reached for the edge of the curtain, I yanked it open in one quick movement. The shower was empty. Not just empty of people. There was nothing there at all. No shower head, no faucets, nothing. Just bare, cracked tiles and a drain in the floor. And the drain looked wet, like something had recently gone down it. I backed out of the bathroom quickly, not bothering to turn off the light. As I hurried back to my room, I noticed something I hadn't before. There was another door at the very end of the hallway, past the bathroom. It looked different from the other doors, heavier, with what appeared to be a padlock on it. As I was standing there staring at this door, the light in the bathroom suddenly went out, plunging the hallway into complete darkness. And then I heard it, that same wet, dragging sound. But now it seemed to be coming from behind that mysterious locked door. I ran back to my room, closed the door as quietly as I could, and climbed into my bunk with my heart racing. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I asked the guy in the bunk above me about the door at the end of the hallway. "Oh, that," he said, lowering his voice. "That goes down to the basement. The owner keeps it locked." "The basement? What's down there?" He shrugged. "Storage. Probably." But he hesitated. "But what?" "Every night, around 3 a.m., the owner goes down there with food. Food, like a late-night snack. No, like a lot of food. Enough for several people. And sometimes I hear voices coming from down there, not speaking any language I recognize." Before I could ask anything else, the owner appeared in the doorway of our room, staring at us with those squinty eyes. The other guy immediately shut up and pretended to be busy with his phone. I checked out that day, willing to pay extra for a proper hostel in the city center. As I was leaving, I noticed a door in the kitchen that I hadn't seen before. It was partially hidden behind a refrigerator. It was identical to the door at the end of the hallway, heavy, with a padlock. And beside it on the floor was a tray with some bread and what looked like raw meat. I later looked up the building online and found out it had originally been owned by a wealthy family in the early 1900s. During World War II, they reportedly hid several Jewish families in a series of rooms they had built in the basement. According to local legend, when the Nazis eventually raided the building, the hidden families were trapped in the basement rooms with no way out. The stories said that no one ever found them, and the rooms were sealed off after the war. I don't know what's really in that basement, but I know one thing for sure. Whatever it is, it's still hungry.
I used to work the night shift at a hostel in Amsterdam. It was one of those jobs you take when you're a broke student trying to make ends meet. Free accommodation in the staff quarters, some pocket money, and a chance to meet travelers from around the world. The hours were rough, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., but the job itself wasn't exactly demanding. Check in late arrivals, make sure no one's causing trouble, and basically just be there in case of emergency. The hostel was a converted canal house about 400 years old, with those steep, narrow staircases typical of Amsterdam architecture. It had 5 floors, the ground floor with reception, bar, and common area, 3 floors of guest rooms above, and a basement level with the kitchen, laundry, and staff quarters. The building had that creaky, settled feeling that old structures get, where no floor is quite level and no wall is perfectly straight. I'd been working there for about 3 months when the incident started. At first it was just small things, items in the reception area being moved overnight, lights that I distinctly remembered turning off being on in the morning, doors that should have been locked found slightly ajar. I assumed it was either forgetfulness on my part or maybe other staff members coming in early. Then the guests started complaining. Always room 17, on the top floor. Guests would come down in the middle of the night, sometimes genuinely frightened, saying they heard someone walking around their room or sitting on their bed. When I'd go up to check, The room would be perfectly normal, with everyone asleep, or at least in their own bed. After the third or fourth complaint, I mentioned it to Dirk, the manager. He got this strange look on his face, but quickly dismissed it. "Old building," he said with a shrug. "Makes noises. Tourists get spooked easily." But one night, around 3 a.m., a girl came running down to reception in tears. She was from room 17. Of course. "There's someone in our room," she whispered, her eyes wide with panic. Not another guest. Someone, something else. It was standing between the beds, just watching us. When I turned on my phone light, it moved to the corner, but I could still see it, like a shadow, but standing up. I tried to calm her down and offered to go check on the room with her. She adamantly refused to go back up, so I told her she could wait in the common area while I investigated. The hostel was quiet that night. Low season. Only about half the beds occupied. The staircase up to the top floor always felt longer and steeper in the middle of the night. By the time I reached the fourth floor, I was slightly out of breath, and the air felt noticeably colder than in the rest of the building. Room 17 was at the end of the hallway, under the eaves of the room. I knocked softly, not wanting to wake everyone if they were asleep. No answer. I used my master key to open the door as quietly as possible and peeked in. The room was a typical 8-bed dorm with 4 bunk beds arranged along the wall. In the dim light coming from the hallway, I could see the shapes of sleeping people in most of the beds. Nothing seemed out of place. I was about to close the door when I noticed something odd about the corner farthest from the door. It was darker there, not just shadowed, but a deeper kind of darkness that seemed to have substance and depth. As my eyes adjusted, I could almost make out a shape within that darkness. Something vaguely human-sized, but wrong somehow, like a person standing unnaturally still. "Hello?" I whispered. No response, but I swear that deeper patch of darkness shifted slightly. I reached for the light switch and flipped it on. The overhead light illuminated the room, and the corner was empty. Just a normal corner where 2 white walls met. The guests stirred and grumbled at the sudden brightness. "Sorry," I said. "Just checking everything's okay in here." Someone reported a disturbance. A guy in the bottom bunk nearest me sat up, rubbing his eyes. "You mean the man who stands in the corner?" he asked matter-of-factly, like he was asking about breakfast times. "You've seen him too?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. "Every night since I checked in," he replied. "He just stands there watching us. Doesn't bother anyone as long as you don't acknowledge him." He lay back down and pulled his blanket over his head, clearly done with the conversation. I turned the light back off and closed the door, thoroughly creeped out. When I got back downstairs, the girl was still waiting in the common area, huddled in a blanket she'd found somewhere. "Did you see it?" she asked. "No," I lied. "Everything seems normal, but I can move you to another room if you'd like." She nodded gratefully, and I set her up in one of the few empty beds we had in the first-floor dorm. After she'd gone to her new room, I went back to the reception desk and started looking through the hostel's booking system. Room 17 had an unusually high number of single-night stays and requests to change rooms. People rarely stayed there for their entire booking. Around 5 a.m., when the hostel was at its quietest, I decided to do something probably stupid. I went back up to room 17, not to go inside, but to sit in the hallway outside and watch. I don't know what I expected to happen, but I felt compelled to investigate further. After about 20 minutes of sitting there in the dark, I heard it. Footsteps inside the room. Slow, deliberate steps that didn't match the normal movements of sleeping guests. Then a creak, like someone sitting down on one of the beds. I pressed my ear against the door and heard what sounded like whispering, though I couldn't make out any word. It wasn't coming from where any of the beds were positioned. It was coming from that far corner. Suddenly the door I was leaning against opened inward, and I nearly fell into the room. One of the guests was standing there, looking annoyed. "Can I help you?" he whispered harshly. Sorry. I fumbled for an explanation. Routine security check. At 5 in the morning, by listening at our door, he clearly wasn't buying it. Did you hear anything unusual just now? I asked. Like footsteps or whispering? His expression changed from annoyed to uncomfortable. Look, we all hear it. Okay, it's just part of staying in this room. Now can I go to the bathroom without finding the night receptionist eavesdropping at our door? I apologized again and let him pass. After he returned to the room and closed the door, I decided I'd had enough creepy experiences for one night and went back downstairs. The next day, I asked one of the housekeepers who'd been working at the hostel for years about room. At first she pretended not to know what I was talking about, but when I pressed her, she sighed and motioned for me to follow her into the laundry room where we wouldn't be overheard. That room, she said in her heavily accented English, was not always a dorm. Before this place was a hostel, when it was still a private house, that was where the family's son lived. The story goes that he was not right in the head. They kept him up there, away from visitors. What happened to him? I asked. They say he hanged himself in the corner of the room, but his spirit doesn't know he's dead. So he still stands there, watching over his room. He doesn't like strangers in his space. I might have dismissed it as a ghost story meant to scare the new guy. Except she added one detail that made my blood run cold. If you ever work a night shift and the temperature drops suddenly, or you hear footsteps on the stairs when no guests are moving around, check the basement door. Sometimes he tries to get into the staff quarters. That's why we always keep that door locked at night. That night, around 4 a.m., the temperature in the reception area plummeted so quickly I could see my breath, and then I heard it. Heavy footsteps on the stairs, coming down from the upper floors. Slow, deliberate steps that didn't sound quite right, like the person taking them had an odd gait. I sat frozen behind the desk as the footsteps reached the ground floor and crossed the common area. They were heading for the basement door. I'd like to say I bravely went to investigate, but the truth is, I hid behind the reception desk until the footsteps retreated and the temperature returned to normal. The next day, I gave my notice. Some jobs just aren't worth the night terrors, even if they do come with free accommodation. The weird part, when I told Dirk I was quitting, he didn't seem surprised at all. He just nodded and said they'd find a replacement. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "We'll put you in room 17 until you leave, since you're not going to be working nights anymore." I was checked into a proper hotel that same afternoon. Some things you just don't mess with.
When you're traveling alone for months on end, you get used to sharing your space with strangers. There's a certain unspoken etiquette in hostel dorms. Don't make noise when people are sleeping. Don't take up more than your fair share of space. And generally just be considerate. Most travelers respect these rules, but occasionally you meet someone who just doesn't. I was 3 months into a Southeast Asia trip when I checked into this hostel in Hanoi, Vietnam. It was one of those places that looks amazing online. Refurbished colonial building, rooftop bar, free breakfast. But when you arrive, you realize the photos were taken very strategically to hide the mold on the walls, and the fact that the rooftop bar is just a couple of plastic chairs next to a cooler of beer. Still, it was cheap and centrally located, so I wasn't complaining. I was assigned to a 6-bed female dorm on the 3rd floor. When I arrived, there were already 4 other women in the room. 2 friends from Germany, a solo traveler from Australia, and a Korean girl who kept to herself. The 6th bed, a bottom bunk in the corner, was empty. The first night passed uneventfully. We all went out to explore the city's night market and street food scene, came back at reasonable hours, and were respectful of each other's space. Standard hostel experience. The next day, while we were all out,
Someone took the empty bed. I returned to the room in the afternoon to drop off some souvenirs I'd bought, and found the bed made up with plain white sheets, different from the colorful patterned ones the hostel provided. There was a small suitcase underneath, ancient looking, and made of some kind of dark leather that seemed out of place among our modern backpacks. I didn't think much of it at the time. New guests come and go in hostels every day. I just assumed I'd meet the newcomer late. That evening, as we were all getting ready to go out for dinner, the Australian girl, Emma, asked if anyone had met the new girl yet. None of us had. Weird, she said. Her stuff was here when I came back around noon, but I haven't seen her all day. Again, not that unusual. People keep different schedules when traveling. We returned from dinner around 10 p.m., and the room was dark. As we fumbled for the light switch, someone hissed from the corner bed, "Leave it off." The voice was female but had an odd quality to it, slightly raspy, with an accent I couldn't place. One of the German girls turned the light on anyway, and we all looked toward the corner bed. There was a woman lying there, facing the wall. All we could see was long black hair spread across the pillow, and a slender form under the blanket. She didn't turn to look at us. "Sorry, we didn't realize you were sleeping already." No response. The five of us exchanged glances and silently agreed to be as quiet as possible as we got ready for bed. When I went to brush my teeth, I noticed the bathroom light was flickering, casting strange shadows on the wall. It hadn't done that the night before. In the middle of the night, I woke up needing to use the bathroom. As I climbed down from my bunk, I glanced toward the corner bed. In the dim light coming from the street outside, I could see that it was empty. The sheets were thrown back, but there was no sign of its occupant. When I returned from the bathroom, I nearly screamed. There was a figure standing in the middle of the room, perfectly still. It took me a moment to realize it was the woman from the corner bed. She was just standing there, in a white nightgown, facing the wall. "Are you okay?" I whispered, not wanting to wake the others. She turned her head slightly, not enough for me to see her face, and whispered back, "I'm waiting." "For what?" I asked. "For you all to leave," she replied, and then climbed back into her bed, without another word. The next morning, I woke up to find Emma and the Korean girl, Jin, having a heated whispered conversation. When they saw I was awake, Emma motioned for me to join them in the hallway. "Did you hear anything weird last night?" she asked once we were outside. "You mean our new roommate standing in the middle of the room like something out of a horror movie?" I replied. "No. After that," Jin said. "Around 3 a.m., she was talking to someone. I thought she was on the phone at first," Emma added. "But then I realized she was having a conversation with someone in the room. But the voice answering her, it didn't sound human. I hadn't heard anything, having fallen back asleep pretty quickly after the strange encounter." "What did it sound like?" I asked. "Like static, but with words somehow embedded in it," Emma tried to explain. "And she kept saying, 'Yes, I understand, and I'll bring them.'" We decided to ask the front desk about our mysterious roommate when we went down for breakfast. The guy working reception checked his computer and looked confused. "The 6th bed in your room is empty according to our system," he said. "No one has booked it for tonight yet. But there's definitely someone staying there," I insisted. "A woman with long black hair. She has a suitcase and everything." He shrugged. "Maybe the night staff forgot to enter it in the system. I'll check when the manager comes in." When we returned to our room later that day, the corner bed was made up with the hostel's standard sheets, and the old leather suitcase was gone. The German girls told us the hostel staff had come to change the sheets, looking confused about why the bed had been slept in when it was supposed to be empty. That night, all 5 of us went out together for drinks, partly because we wanted to bond over the weird experience, and partly because none of us was eager to return to the room. When we finally did go back, well after midnight, The corner bed was still empty. As we were getting ready for bed, Jin suddenly gasped, pointing to her backpack. "My jade bracelet is missing," she said. "It was a gift from my grandmother." We all helped her search, but the bracelet was nowhere to be found. Emma then checked her belongings and discovered that her small travel journal was missing. I frantically went through my stuff. My grandmother's rosary beads, which I always carried for good luck, were gone. The German girls hadn't lost anything, but they looked as unsettled as the rest of us felt. "Should we tell the staff?" one of them suggested. Before we could decide what to do, the lights in the room flickered and went out. In the sudden darkness, we heard the door to our room slowly creak open. There, silhouetted in the hallway light, was a figure in a white nightgown. I couldn't see her face, but I knew it was her, our unwanted roommate. "I've been waiting for you all," she said in that strange, raspy voice. "I needed something from each of you, something personal, something meaningful." She stepped into the room, and as she moved into the light cast by our phone flashlights, we could finally see her face clearly for the first time, or rather the lack of it. Where facial features should have been, there was just smooth, pale skin with faint indentations where eyes, nose, and mouth should be. Jin screamed, and the thing in the doorway tilted its head as if curious. Then it spoke again, but this time, multiple voices came from it simultaneously. Some high and childlike, others deep and guttural. "Thank you for your contributions," the voices said in unsettling unison. "They will help sustain me until the next guests arrive." Then it was gone, melting away into the darkness of the hallway like mist. We spent the rest of the night huddled together in the German girls' beds, too terrified to leave the room but too frightened to sleep. In the morning we checked out immediately. All five of the manager tried to convince us to stay, offering free nights, acting like we were just typical tourists complaining about minor inconveniences. As we were leaving, an elderly cleaning woman stopped us in the hallway. "The sixth bed," she said quietly. "The one in the corner. No one should sleep there." "Why not?" I asked. "That corner of the building. There used to be a small shrine there, many years ago, before the French came and built over it. A shrine to hungry ghosts, those without families to remember them. They still come, looking for connections to the living." She made a warding gesture. "They take small things from people, objects with emotional value. It helps them remember what it was like to be human." We never did get our missing items back. Sometimes I think about that faceless woman, and wonder how many travelers have unknowingly shared their room with her, each leaving behind a small piece of themselves that meant something. I still stay in hostels when I travel, but I always check now. I never take a bottom bunk in the corner, and I never ever bring anything irreplaceable with me.
I've always prided myself on being a savvy traveler. I research extensively before each trip, read all the reviews, and generally know exactly what I'm walking into. But sometimes, no amount of preparation can save you from what's waiting. Last year, I was backpacking through Portugal and decided to spend a few days in Sintra. You know, that fairy tale town with all the colorful palaces and castles nestled in the mountains. It's a popular day trip from Lisbon, but I wanted to experience the place after all the tour buses left. I booked a small hostel called Traveler's Rest on the outskirts of town. It had only been open for about 6 months, so there weren't many reviews, but the few it had were positive, mentioning how quiet and clean it was. The price was right, and the photos showed a charming converted villa with garden views. Perfect. I arrived in Sintra in the late afternoon after spending the day exploring Lisbon. By the time I caught the local bus that would take me to the hostel's location, the sun was already beginning to set. The bus dropped me off at the end of a long, winding road lined with tall trees that blocked what little remaining daylight there was.
According to my Maps app, the hostel was about a 10-minute walk down this road. As I started walking, dragging my wheeled backpack behind me, I couldn't help but notice how isolated the area was. There were a few houses set far back from the road, but they all looked dark and shuttered. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional distant barking of a dog. After walking for what felt like much longer than 10 minutes, I finally spotted a small weathered sign with "Traveler's Rest" painted on it, in faded letter. It pointed down an even narrower side road, really more of a dirt path, that disappeared into a densely wooded area. At this point, doubts were creeping in. This didn't match the photos I'd seen online, which had shown a villa with well-maintained garden. But it was getting dark quickly. I was tired, and my phone was showing only 1 bar of reception. I decided to at least find the place and then make a decision about whether to stay. The path led me to a clearing where a 2-story stone building stood. It looked old, not charming old like in the photos, but neglected old, with peeling paint and several boarded-up windows. A dim light glowed from inside what appeared to be a reception area. I approached cautiously and pushed open the front door, which creaked in that classic horror movie way. The interior was dimly lit by a single lamp on a cluttered desk. The walls were covered in faded floral wallpaper that was peeling in several places, and the air smelled musty, like the place had been closed up for a long time. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. I walked up to the desk and noticed an old-fashioned bell. I rang it and the sound echoed unnervingly through the silent building. After a moment, I heard footsteps from somewhere upstairs, and then the sound of someone descending the staircase. A woman appeared, elderly, thin, with stark white hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a long, dark dress that looked like something from another era. "Yes," she said, her voice surprisingly strong for someone who appeared so frail. "Hi, I have a reservation under the name Michael Anderson." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Confusion? Surprise? Disappointment? "A reservation?" she repeated, moving slowly behind the desk. "We don't get many of those anymore." She opened a large leather-bound book, not a computer or even a modern reservation system, but an actual handwritten guest book. She ran her finger down a page, frowning. "Anderson, Anderson. Ah, yes, here you are. But this is strange. Your reservation was for next month." I pulled out my phone and opened the booking confirmation email. "No, it's definitely for today. Look," I said, showing her the screen. She squinted at the phone, then shook her head. "Our system must have made an error. No matter, we have plenty of room. You can stay in room 7, top floor." Something felt off, but I was exhausted, and the prospect of trying to find alternative accommodation at this hour in an unfamiliar town was daunting. So I agreed, paid in cash. She didn't accept cards, and followed her up the creaking staircase. The upstairs hallway was long and narrow, with doors on either side. Some had numbers on them, others didn't. The floorboards creaked under our feet, and I noticed that the runner carpet was worn through in places. The only illumination came from wall sconces that cast eerie, flickering shadow. Room 7 was at the very end of the hall. The woman, who still hadn't introduced herself, unlocked it with a large iron key, and pushed the door open. "Bathroom is shared, at the end of the hall," she said. "Breakfast is served from 7 to 9 in the morning, room downstairs." She handed me the key and left without another word, her footsteps fading as she walked back down the hallway. The room was small and sparsely furnished. A twin bed with an iron frame, a small desk with a chair, and a wardrobe that looked like it had seen better days. A single window looked out onto the dark woods behind the property. I tried to open it for some fresh air, but it was either painted shut or swollen with age. I set down my backpack and took a quick inventory of the room. No Wi-Fi information, no TV, Not even a pamphlet about local attractions. Just bare essentials. The bedding looked clean at least, though the floral pattern was faded and had probably been fashionable sometime in the 1970s. By now I was too tired to care about the state of the place. I decided to use the bathroom before bed. I grabbed my toiletry bag and headed down the hall. The bathroom was as outdated as the rest of the place. A clawfoot tub with a shower attachment, a pedestal sink with separate hot and cold taps, and a toilet with a chain pull. Everything was clean but ancient. As I was brushing my teeth, I heard a door open somewhere in the hallway, followed by footsteps. I finished up quickly, eager to get back to my room and lock the door behind me. But when I stepped into the hallway, it was empty and silent. All the doors were closed. Back in my room, I changed into sleep clothes and got into bed. The mattress was lumpy, and the springs creaked with every movement, but I was so tired that I fell asleep almost immediately. I woke sometime in the middle of the night to the sound of whispers. At first I thought I was dreaming, but as I became more alert, I realized the whispers were coming from the hallway, just outside my door. I couldn't make out what they were saying. The voices were too low, but I could hear several different people, both men and women, seemingly engaged in an intense discussion. I lay perfectly still, listening. The whispers continued for what felt like an eternity, occasionally rising in volume before dropping back down to an indistinct murmur. Then I heard my door handle turn slowly. The key was in the lock on the inside, so the door didn't open, but someone was definitely trying to get in. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure whoever was outside could hear it. The handle turned again, more forcefully this time, rattling the door in its frame. Then silence. After a few moments, I heard footsteps moving away down the hall. I lay awake for what must have been hours, too terrified to move. Eventually exhaustion won out, and I drifted back to sleep. Morning came, sunlight streaming through the dusty window. In the daylight, the room looked even shabbier than it had the night before, but at least it dispelled some of the eerie atmosphere. I dressed quickly, eager to get some breakfast and then spend the day out exploring Sintra. The morning room the woman had mentioned turned out to be a small sunlit space at the back of the house. A long table was set with several places, though I appeared to be the only guest. A simple breakfast of bread, cheese and fruit was laid out. As I ate, the elderly woman appeared, carrying a pot of coffee. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, pouring me a cup without waiting for my answer. "Actually, no," I replied. "I heard people outside my room in the middle of the night. Someone tried to open my door." She froze for a moment, then continued pouring as if I hadn't said anything concerning. "Must have been the old plumbing. This house makes all sorts of noises at night." "It wasn't plumbing," I insisted. "It was voices, people talking, and someone definitely tried my door handle." She gave me a long, appraising look. "You're in room 7, yes? That was the nursery, many years ago, before the house was converted." "The nursery?" "Yes, for the children. There were 5 of them, I believe." "Such a tragedy." "What tragedy?" I asked, suddenly not very hungry anymore. She sighed, setting down the coffee pot. "I don't usually tell guests this story. It's not good for business, but since you've already been disturbed, the family that owned this house before it became a hostel, the Noguera family, they were quite wealthy. 5 children, all under the age of 10. One night, the youngest child became ill. High fever, delirium. By morning he had passed away, but by then, the illness had spread to the other children. Within a week, all 5 had died. The parents, overcome with grief, took their own lives." I stared at her, my coffee forgotten. "And room 7 was where the children slept?" "Yes, all of them, in bunk beds. It was the largest bedroom in the house." She paused, looking out the window. "People say they can still hear them sometimes, playing, talking, looking for new friends." A chill ran down my spine. "And you put me in that room knowing this?" She looked back at me, her expression unreadable. "All the rooms have their stories, Mr. Anderson. This is a very old house.
But room 7, well, the children seem to like having guests. They get lonely. I decided right then that I wouldn't be spending another night at Traveler's Rest. I told the woman I had a change of plans and would be checking out immediately. She didn't seem surprised or even disappointed. As I was packing my things, I noticed something I had missed the night before. 5 small handprints on the wall beside the wardrobe, too small to belong to an adult, pressed into the faded wallpaper like they had been made with paint. But looking closer, the marks didn't look like paint at all. They looked like ash. I got out of there as fast as I could, not even caring that I'd paid for 3 nights. Back in the town center, I found a proper hotel and tried to put the experience behind me. That evening, I decided to look up some information about the history of the area where the hostel was located. I found a few old newspaper articles about the Noguera family and their tragic end, but according to those articles, the family house had burned to the ground. There was nothing left but the foundation. I also found a more recent article, dated just 3 years ago, about plans to develop that area into vacation homes. The article mentioned that the land had been vacant since the fire, with locals considering it cursed or haunted. So what exactly was the building I had stayed in, and who was the elderly woman? I never went back to find out, but sometimes I still dream about that room, room 7, and in my dreams, I hear children's voices, whispering, laughing, and asking me to play with them. In these dreams, I always get out of bed and open the door to the hallway, where 5 small figures wait for me in the darkness, their hands outstretched, leaving ashy prints on everything they touch. I've checked the booking site many times since then, but Traveler's Rest no longer appears in the listings. It's as if it never existed at all, but I have the key. Somehow in my haste to leave, I forgot to return that heavy iron key to. Sometimes I take it out and look at it, and when I do, I swear I can hear distant, childish giggles, as if from the other end of a long dark hallway.
I've stayed in countless hostels over the years, from 5-star luxury in Berlin to bare-bones shacks on Southeast Asian beaches. But the experience I had at the Wayward Traveller Hostel in northern Scotland still haunts me 3 years later. It was late October, approaching the off-season for tourism in the Highlands. The weather had turned wet and cold, and the tiny village where I found myself was practically deserted. I'd planned to hike some of the famous trails in the area, but 3 straight days of driving rain had kept me indoors. The Wayward Traveller was an old stone building that had once been a parish house, situated on the edge of the village with views of the misty mountains beyond. In peak season, I imagine it would have been charming, but in the dreary autumn rain, it just looked depressing and slightly foreboding. I'd already been there for 2 nights in a 4-bed dorm that I had entirely to myself. The hostel seemed to be running on a skeleton staff. Just a young woman named Fiona who manned the front desk during the day, and an older man called Murray who took over at night. I rarely saw anyone else. On my 3rd morning there, as I was sitting in the common room watching the rain and contemplating whether to cut my losses and head back to Edinburgh, Fiona approached me with an apologetic look. "I'm afraid we need your room for a group booking coming in this afternoon," she said. "Would you mind moving to the annex? It's just across the courtyard, and you'd have the whole place to yourself. Same price, just a bit more rustic." I wasn't thrilled about having to move, but I also didn't have many options. The next hostel was over 30 miles away, and I didn't have a car, so I agreed. Fiona gave me a key attached to a heavy wooden fob carved with the number 4. "It's up the stairs, end of the hall," she said. "The building's old, used to be the caretaker's cottage, so it can be a bit drafty. Extra blankets in the wardrobe if you need them." The annex was indeed just across a small courtyard, but crossing it in the pouring rain still left me soaked. The building was much smaller than the main hostel. A two-story stone cottage with small windows and a sloped roof. It looked significantly older than the main building, and in considerably worse condition. Inside, a narrow staircase led up to a dimly lit hallway with 4 doors. Following Fiona's instructions, I made my way to the end and unlocked room 4. The room was basic, to put it kindly. A single metal-framed bed with a thin mattress, a wardrobe with one door hanging at an angle, and a small desk with a wobbly chair. The window was small and set high in the wall, offering a view of nothing but gray sky. The walls were bare except for water stains creeping down from the ceiling, and the wooden floorboards creaked alarmingly with every step. But it was a place to sleep, and I only planned to stay one more night anyway. I arranged my things, then headed back to the main building to use the Wi-Fi and wait out the rain. As I was crossing the courtyard, I noticed someone watching me from an upstairs window of the annex. Just a silhouette, really, backlit against what must have been a light inside. I found this strange, since Fiona had said I'd have the annex to myself, but I figured maybe another guest had arrived and been placed there as well. Back in the main building, I asked Fiona about it. Another guest in the annex? She looked confused. No, you're definitely the only one. The rest of the rooms are being renovated. That's why they're not on our booking system. I could have sworn I saw someone in one of the upstairs windows just now. I insisted. Fiona's expression changed, just for a moment, before she forced a smile. Probably just a shadow, or reflection. Those old windows can play tricks on the eyes, especially in this dreary weather. I spent the rest of the day in the main building, reading and occasionally chatting with the few other guests who were checking in. A German couple and what appeared to be a small school group of teenagers with 2 teachers. By evening, the place felt more lively than it had been during my entire stay. Around 9 p.m. I headed back to the annex. The rain had finally stopped, but the courtyard was slick with puddles and mud. The annex building was completely dark except for a faint light in one upstairs window. Not my room, but the one next to it. Room 3. I stood in the courtyard for a moment, staring up at that light. I was absolutely certain Fiona had said I was the only guest in the annex, and that the other rooms were being renovated. So why was there a light on? Inside, the annex was silent and cold. I climbed the creaking stairs slowly, listening for any sound of another person. At the top, I noticed a strip of light under the door of room 3. For a few moments, I debated whether to, my curiosity warring with the awkwardness of disturbing a stranger. Eventually, curiosity won. I knocked softly on the door of room 3. No answer. I knocked again, a bit louder. Hello? Sorry to bother you. Still nothing. But as I was about to turn away, I heard a sound from inside the room. A sort of scraping, like furniture being moved across the floor. Then silence again. I tried the handle, but the door was locked. Feeling increasingly uneasy, I retreated to my own room, double-checking that my door was securely locked behind me. My room was freezing cold. I could see my breath in the air, and the small radiator under the window was stone cold, despite being turned to its highest setting. I layered on extra clothes and wrapped myself in both my blanket and the extras I found in the wardrobe, which smelled strongly of mothballs and damp. Despite the cold and my uneasiness about the mysterious occupant of room 3, I eventually fell into a fitful sleep. I'm not sure exactly what time it was when I woke up. My phone had died, and I hadn't bothered to plug it in, but it was still dark outside. What woke me was a sound. Footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, moving back and forth past my door. Occasionally they would stop, and I would hear what sounded like scratching on the wooden door, as if someone was running their fingernails across it. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing,
listening to those footsteps pace up and down the hallway. Occasionally, they would stop outside one of the other rooms, and I would hear the same scratching sound, followed by the sound of a door handle being tried. This went on for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes or so. I kept waiting for the footsteps to stop outside my door, for the handle to turn, but they never did. Eventually, the noises stopped altogether, and the hallway fell silent. I must have fallen back asleep at some point, because the next thing I knew, gray daylight was filtering through the small window. I got dressed quickly, threw my things into my backpack, and left the room, eager to get back to the main building. As I stepped into the hallway, I noticed that the door to room 3 was now slightly ajar. I hesitated, then pushed it open further. The room was empty, not just empty of people, but completely bare. No furniture, no bedding. The floorboards had been pulled up in several places, and there were tools scattered around, confirming that the room was indeed under renovation. The window was covered with plastic sheeting, which fluttered slightly in a draft. There was no way anyone could have been staying in this room. I hurried across the courtyard to the main building, where I found Murray still on duty at the front desk, looking tired as his shift was coming to an end. "Checking out?" he asked as I approached. "Yes, but first, can you tell me about the annex, about the other guests there?" Murray frowned. "Other guests? There aren't any, you were the only one. The rest of the rooms are being renovated. Have been for months now. But I saw a light in room 3 last night, and I heard someone walking in the hallway, trying door handles." Murray's face paled slightly. "You heard someone trying to get into rooms?" I nodded. "All except mine. Strangely enough." He sighed heavily and glanced around to make sure no one else was within earshot. "Look, we don't like to tell guests this, because it's bad for business. But there are stories about the annex, especially room 4. "My room? What about it? It used to be a storage room, not a bedroom. The caretaker who lived in the cottage. This was back in the 1950s. He apparently had some mental health issues. Paranoia. He became convinced that travelers were trying to break in and steal from him. One night, a young backpacker asked to stay when the main house was full. The caretaker reluctantly let him sleep in what's now room 4. Murray paused, looking uncomfortable. "And?" I prompted. "And in the middle of the night, the caretaker apparently had some kind of episode. He barricaded the guest in the room, nailed the door shut from the outside. Then he went through the rest of the cottage, checking all the doors and windows, convinced there were more intruders. By the time anyone realized what had happened, the poor backpacker had died, a combination of cold and dehydration. It was 3 days before they found him." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "And you still put guests in that room?" "Not usually. It's only used as absolute last resort, when everything else is full. Most of the time, we keep it locked." He hesitated, then added, "Some of the staff claim they've heard the caretaker still walking the halls at night, checking doors, making sure no one can get in or out. But room 4 is special. He never checks that one, because that's where he wanted to keep his victim trapped." I realized aloud. Murray nodded grimly. "That's the theory. Yes. The strange thing is, others have reported seeing lights in the unused rooms, just like you did. And before you ask, no, there's no electricity connected to those rooms right now because of the renovation work." I checked out immediately, and caught the first bus out of that village. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if the caretaker's ghost had tried my door that night. Would he have moved on when he found it locked, as he did, or would he have recognized it as his room, the one place where he wanted someone trapped inside? I've stayed in many hostels since then, but I always check the history of the building first, and I never ever stay in an
Working the night shift at a hostel was supposed to be an easy job. Check in the occasional late arrival. Make sure drunk backpackers don't make too much noise coming back from the bars. And basically just be present in case of emergencies. Most nights I could study or watch Netflix for hours without interruption. I was a student in Lisbon at the time, and the job at Sunflower Hostel was perfect. Walking distance from my apartment, decent pay, and free breakfast. The hostel was in a renovated 19th century building in the Alfama district. All winding staircases and oddly shaped rooms filled with bunk beds. It had that perfect mix of historic charm and modern amenities that tourists love. My shift was from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., which meant I handled the stragglers and partygoers. Most nights were predictable. Check in a few late arrivals until about 1 a.m. Deal with the post-bar crowd between 2 and 4 a.m. Then peace and quiet until morning. The night it happened was a Tuesday in November, typically one of our slowest periods. I came in for my shift, got the usual handover from Miguel, the evening receptionist. Nothing special to note, just a few expected late check-ins, and settled in for what I assumed would be a quiet night. Around midnight, most of the guests were either already asleep or still out enjoying Lisbon's nightlife. The hostel was quiet, just the occasional creak of the old building settling. I was catching up on some reading for my cultural anthropology class when the front door opened. A woman walked in, pulling a small suitcase behind her. She was probably in her mid-30s, with dark hair cut in a severe bob and wearing a gray coat that seemed too heavy for Lisbon's mild autumn weather. Something about her immediately put me on edge, though I couldn't have explained why. "Good evening," I said, putting on my professional smile. Checking in, she approached the desk slowly, her face expressionless. "Yes, I have a reservation." I pulled up the booking system on the computer. "Name, please?" "Maria Silva." I typed the name into the system and frowned. "I'm not seeing a reservation under that name. Are you sure it's for tonight?" "Yes," she said firmly. "Check again." I searched a few different ways, by email, by check-in date, even looking through the next few days in case she'd gotten the date wrong. Nothing. "I'm sorry, but there's no reservation under your name. We do have some beds available though. I can create a new booking for you if you'd like." The woman stared at me for a long moment, her dark eyes unblinking. "No," she finally said. "The reservation should be there. I stay in the same room every year, on this night." Something about the way she said it, so insistent, so specific, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Still, I maintained my professional demeanor. "Which room is that? I can check if it's available." "Room 17, she said immediately. "The attic room." Now I was really confused. Room 17 was indeed in the attic. A small 6-bed dorm tucked under the eaves of the roof, but it wasn't even in our system as an available room. "Room 17 is closed for renovations," I explained. "It has been for several months now. Are you sure you didn't stay in a different room last time?" The woman's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the lobby seemed to drop several degrees. "It must be room 17, she insisted. "I always stay in room 17 on November." I glanced at the date on my computer screen. November 12th. What were the odds that she would specifically request the one room that was unavailable on this specific date? "I'm sorry, but that room is definitely closed. The floor was damaged by a water leak and needs to be replaced. There's literally no furniture in there right now. I can offer you a bed in room 8, which is similar, also on the top floor, but on the other side of the building." The woman continued to stare at me, and I noticed for the first time that she hadn't blinked once during our entire conversation. Her gaze was unsettlingly intense. "I need to be in room 17, she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "It's important." By this point I was getting serious creepy vibes, but I tried to remain professional. As I explained, that's simply not possible. "The room is under construction. If you'd like a different room, I'm happy to help, but room 17 is not an option."
She stood perfectly still for what felt like a full minute, just staring at me. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out, pulling her small suitcase behind her. I breathed a sigh of relief once the door closed, telling myself I was being ridiculous for feeling so unnerved by a slightly odd guest. I made a mental note to mention the incident to my manager the next day, in case the woman returned and caused problems. Around 2 a.m., the post-bar crowd started trickling in, a group of Australian guys being a bit too loud, a couple of German girls quietly giggling, the usual late-night returns. I was just helping one of the Australians find his room key when I heard a noise from upstairs, a heavy thud, like something large falling over. "Did you hear that?" one of the German girls asked. I nodded. Probably just someone moving around upstairs. "I'll go check once I'm done here." After sorting out the Australians, I grabbed the master keyring and a flashlight, and headed upstairs to investigate. The hostel was an old building, and strange noises weren't uncommon, but I needed to make sure it wasn't something requiring attention. The top floor of the hostel held rooms 14 through 19, with 17 being the only one currently unused. As I reached the top of the stairs, I immediately noticed something wrong. The door to room 7, not just unlocked but standing wide open, which should have been impossible since I had the only key. I approached cautiously, shining my flashlight into the room. As I'd told the woman earlier, it was empty of furniture, just bare floorboards, some of which had been pulled up to access the joists beneath, and a few tools left by the construction workers. But now in the middle of the room, there was a suitcase, a small black suitcase that looked exactly like the one the woman from earlier had been pulling. My initial thought was that she had somehow gotten into the building after I'd turned her away and broken into the room. I stepped inside, sweeping my flashlight around, looking for signs of how she might have entered. "Hello, Miss Silva? You can't be in here. This area's closed for safety reasons." No response, but I heard movement, a faint rustling sound coming from the far corner of the room, where the ceiling sloped down to meet the floor. I directed my flashlight toward the noise. There was nothing there, no person, no source for the sound I'd heard. But as I moved the light along the wall, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A small memorial plaque, the kind you might see on a park bench, was affixed to the wall. I stepped closer to read it. "In memory of Maria Silva, 1982, who took her own life in this room. May she find the peace in death that eluded her." The date on the plaque was November 12th, 2016. Exactly 6 years ago to the day. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding, and pulled the door shut. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the key in the lock. I didn't believe in ghosts, or at least, I hadn't until that moment, but I couldn't explain what I'd just seen. Back at the reception desk, I tried to calm myself down. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe a previous employee had told the woman she could stay in that room as a sick joke. Maybe the plaque was part of the renovation work, something being added to the room as a memorial. Maybe I was just tired, and my mind was playing tricks on me. I decided to check the hostel's records to see if I could find any information about a Maria Silva who had stayed with us before. The computer system only went back 3 years, but we kept physical guest books for longer than that. I found the box of old registration books in the office behind reception, and started looking through them. In the book from 2016, I found it, a check-in for Maria Silva, on November 10th, but there was a note scrawled in the margin. "Guest, deceased. Police report filed." A quick internet search confirmed what I was already beginning to suspect. In 2016, a woman named Maria Silva had checked into the hostel and, 2 days later, taken her own life in room. The incident had been hushed up as much as possible. Bad publicity for a hostel, but there had been a small news article about it. The next morning, when my shift ended, I told my manager about the strange woman who had asked for room 17, and the suitcase I'd found there. Her face went pale. "It's happened before," she admitted reluctantly. "Every year on the anniversary, different night staff, same story." She comes, asks for room 17, leaves when she's told no. Sometimes things are moved around in the room afterward. Why don't you warn the night staff? I asked, feeling a mix of fear and anger. Would you have taken the job if we told you the place was haunted? She replied with a shrug. Besides, she never hurts anyone. She just wants to stay in the room where she died. I worked at the hostel for another 6 months after that night, but I switched to day shifts only. I never saw Maria Silva again, but other night receptionists did. Always on November 12th. Always asking for room 17. The strangest part, when the renovations were finally complete and room 17 was reopened to guests, the hostel manager decided to permanently block it from being booked on November 12th. She never explains why to the staff, but those of us who know the story understand. It's reserved for a guest who checks in every year, like clockwork, for a stay she never gets to complete.
And that concludes our collection of hostel horror stories for today. If you enjoyed these spine-tingling tales from the road less traveled, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our Realist Quill community. We share new travel stories, both thrilling and chilling, every week. Turn on notifications so you never miss our next adventure. Until next time, safe travels, or maybe not so safe, if you prefer the excitement. See you in the next video.